Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and thanks to you all for joining today's event. Let me just briefly comment on Oren's talk. I really think that we just have so much more convergence about the agreement of the failed policies over 40 years that prioritized what Wall Street wanted rather than what people need. So on to our topic of AI. The CFPB has really devoted some serious resources when it comes to shaping the usage of AI in consumer financial services, and I would say we have become one of the agencies that is the most tech forward, but also with the skepticism that we need about some of the pitfalls. Our technologist program has embedded data scientists and others with advanced technical skills in our investigations, in our examinations, and rulemaking. We've issued some important policies to ensure that new uses of AI comport with existing law. We've conducted so much research and analysis on how generative AI is being deployed, like we see in chatbots with banks across the sector. But ultimately, and I think this builds on what Oren was saying, we want to see AI used in ways that is not just going to promote power and consolidation among a few, but that solves real problems and helps people. So today I want to briefly speak about credit scores and how we should think about them in the context of artificial intelligence. And I think the United States should set a much more explicit goal of shifting away from our outdated approach to credit scores toward one that is more predictive and transparent. And I think we all know the history of credit reports from decades and decades ago. It was companies that were often collecting rumors about each of us, selling those files with very little transparency about the accuracy and who it was being given to. But then actually when you fast forward to the late 1980s, I think it was 1989, we start seeing the first credit scores take hold in America. So it used to be you would retain a consultant or an analytics firm, if you were a lender, to sift through lots of credit files to figure out what kind of model or formula you were going to use for your underwriting. But something shifted. A company called FICO formed an arrangement with 3 of the credit reporting conglomerates, and they created a new foundational model that was going to create a standardized scoring system. Now, importantly, this created standardization, and not many people talk about this, that would ultimately make consumer loan securitization accelerate quite rapidly. Now, the US was already accustomed to having bond issuances rated by companies like Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, who use their own secret sauce to figure out how to assign a grade, giving the investors the ability to compare creditworthiness and standardize it. Now, with a standardized grade or score, this created greater comparability and allowed illiquid loans, like many consumer loans, to become more tradable. And several years later, FICO's dominance then becomes further cemented with the decision by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who began requiring mortgage lenders to submit a FICO score with loans sold to the mortgage giants. So it's now common for securitizations of all types to include FICO scores. Now, decades ago, FICO's standardized score was seen as revolutionary. And I think it's an important benchmark to recall from history as we think about AI in consumer financial services. The rise of the FICO score ended up creating a new set of standardization, a new monopolistic middleman, and a whole ecosystem that converged around it, just like an outlet in a plug that we use. In the US, we all use the same plug. In Europe, they use a different one. That kind of standardization created enormous network effects. But I think as we reflect on the past 30 years with the FICO score, I think we all know there's some issues with it. First, these credit scores can only make predictions about people with credit histories. So that means that young people and others entering the financial system, or others who come from backgrounds or neighborhoods where they couldn't necessarily be an authorized user on their parent who has a prime credit score on their credit card. And it means that they are penalized quite harshly. Second, credit scores continue to be opaque. It's actually often treated like a trade secret. And the arguments for providing that cloak of secrecy to what is essentially a market utility are getting weaker and weaker every year. Third, lenders report to the CFPB that credit scores are really just not predictive enough anymore. To stay competitive, major lenders build their own proprietary scorecards to evaluate applications, and many would like to abandon standardized scores if they could, if not for that liquidity premium that they get from it. Fourth, mortgage lenders are pretty angry about the cost of FICO scores and feel that they're being price gouged. If you look at some of the pricing for FICO scores for mortgage lenders, and recall, they are generally required to purchase a FICO score, although now they can choose a competitor. That has meant that the price of FICO scores has gone up, according to some public reports, 700, 800% in the span of a few years, and it's not actually that much more predictive than it used to be. So we've evaluated this concern carefully, and FICO's price hikes are obviously good for FICO, but harmful to the competitiveness of the mortgage market. And we especially worry about this in the context of expectations of changes in rates, which means that people need lots of offers if they're going to refinance and save money. There's a lot more concerns, but we obviously can do better than this. Recently, the CFPB finalized rules to accelerate open banking in the US, which will further reduce the salience of FICO scores by allowing consumers to use their data from across their life as part of a loan application. But there is the issue of standardization. And to solve this, I think there's questions about what do we do? Now, regulators and market participants could work to use artificial intelligence with a specific model that could be used by lenders, investors, and others to standardize a score. Ideally, this usage of AI could be open source, using a cooperative model to finance its ongoing iterations and testing, and make sure that it's not discriminatory. And perhaps more importantly, it would be transparent about what the key inputs would be so that there is a sense of fairness, there is proper governance about what types of data are to be considered. And this could serve as an important companion to advancing the overall goals of promoting competition and inclusion in a more open banking system. So in short, in the short term, the CFPB and others are going to need to work on addressing this issue of price gouging on credit scores, especially when it comes to the harmful effect in our mortgage markets. But going forward, I think we have to adjust government policies that push the market toward the use of traditional credit scores and create the conditions for meaningful, helpful, and transparent use of AI. It is looking more and more that AI will lurch toward a consolidated set of players. Foundational models that will power so much of the economy. I think we have to ask and reflect about our experience from 35 years ago with FICO scores, about whether we want to replicate that again. Thank you so much.